Margaret Floyd Barry here with the Eat Naked Kitchen, and I am thrilled to be chatting today with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Seth Conger.
Hey,
Hi, Seth.
Margaret. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. Super
Good to see
excited to
you.
be chatting with you today.
I know this is the first time we've got to have this type of chat.
It's going to be fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about an issue that I'm going to bet affects every single person watching this, if not directly, then indirectly, either with someone that you love or somebody that you know well. And that is Alzheimer's disease. And before we dig into the nitty gritty of this actual condition and what we can do and the challenges, Seth, I know you have some pretty specific personal experience with this. Can you share with us your story about why this topic is of has such a special place in your heart?
I do. Thank you. So I always wanted to be a medical doctor, actually, and was on the path to that. Told my grandfather this is something I wanted to do to help him with his health issues. And I ended up getting some head injuries in high school from downhill ski racing. We were just talking about skiing before we jumped on this call. And those head injuries set me on a completely different path. Once I got to college, I would open my textbooks and it would take me 6 times to read one page to remember 50% of what was on that. And it really changed everything in my life. I went down that conventional medical path and I saw a therapist and I saw a regular conventional doctor, medical doctor, and was told the same thing by everybody, that I was either homesick or not smart enough or just had to deal with it. And so finally I ended up changing my major, switching over to business and going down a totally different road. Years later, my grandmother ended up getting dementia. And that was a very difficult situation for my entire family. I mean, she went from their beautiful house into a living facility, into full-time nursing care. I watched my grandfather care for her that entire time. Just the devastation of her forgetting family members and different people is just awful. And after she passed, a couple of years later, my grandfather, Jack, started to see those same signs himself. And he had other chronic health conditions and like macular degeneration. He had some physical conditions, but it was when everything seemed to be fine until the memory issues started to hit. There was a lot of loneliness and depression there. And a lot of times all of that just masks in with one another. And he got to the point where he didn't want to go any further down that path and he ended up taking his own life. Yeah. And it was right after that that I got back into medicine and actually got into functional medicine on the consulting and business side. And the rest of my journey started at that point, and it actually helped me and my own health issues. And I got all my brain function back in about 6 months of being able to layer in these different technologies, different therapies. I did a lot of different lab testing to figure out that my gut was in shambles. Actually very common with head injuries, believe it or not. And was able to get back on a whole new path. And I've dedicated the last 7 years of my life now to really solving this problem of cognitive decline. And that's morphed very much into working with people with pre-Alzheimer's disease.
Can you, well, thank you for sharing that. It's a really intense and powerful personal experience. Can you share, because we kind of use some of these terms a little bit interchangeably. Mm-hmm. You know, you talk about cognitive decline, dementia, pre-Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's. Can you just help for those who are new to this space, just understand the difference between those pieces?
Absolutely. So we like the term pre-Alzheimer's disease, which is not actually a diagnosable or medically validated term, but it makes sense to people. The other terms that we throw out there are mild cognitive impairment or major neurocognitive disorder or subjective cognitive decline, which they don't make any sense to common people who are trying to figure out what is going on with them. And those labels don't help. Now, most doctors aren't actually using the correct label either, because DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Health, keeps changing every few years, and they change the names around and they change the codes around. Dementia is not actually even a term that they should be using. It's now major neurocognitive disorder. So we use pre-Alzheimer's as a umbrella term, and that is just like pre-diabetes, right? Before diabetes, so before Alzheimer's disease. And this can cover a 20 to 30 year span of time before you even see symptoms. So that goes from people with a genetic factor or a family history or multiple underlying conditions that could increase their risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. But really it's about risk at that point until you start to see symptoms. And then there's a threshold there between the diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. But dementia was the old umbrella term. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent form of dementia. Covers about 70% of the cases.
Okay, that's helpful. So you mentioned that this is something that they're either with a genetic predisposition or sort of a different constellation of predisposing factors. Like
Yes.
who, if it's 20 to 30 years out before symptoms have even come into play. And, I know that my grandfather passed away from Alzheimer's. I can very remember, he was a chemistry professor and he was the most brilliant, thoughtful, he was just so, his mind was so powerful. And it just was like this switch was flipped because he went from what seemed, I was young, so I don't remember all of the details, but I remember this just wise man. All of a sudden, it just felt like he went crazy and then suddenly he was gone. And it was within the matter of, a year or two max. So if you're saying that we can identify who's at risk 20 to 30 years long before symptoms come in, like who should be thinking about this?
Well, everybody should be thinking about this. Unfortunately, right now there's 5.7 million Americans diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, most of those of which are above the age of 65. And that number is expected to triple by the year 2050. So right now, there is an estimated 70 million Americans with pre-Alzheimer's disease. So that covers the categories of what we call preclinical Alzheimer's, which is what I explained earlier: genetic factor, family history, underlying conditions. It covers subjective cognitive decline, which means something's off, but the common tests, like the pen and paper test your neurologist would give you, is not sensitive enough to pick that up. And then mild cognitive impairment, which is a diagnosable disease. That means you can still get around town and you can drive, but you need your GPS or you're going to get lost in your neighborhood. You can cook a meal, but you definitely need a recipe in order for it to taste any good. And that's a very scary time because there are no traditional therapies or drugs or anything for mild cognitive impairment. And usually what you get from the doctor is, we'll monitor you, come back in 6 months. And maybe at some point we'll be able to diagnose you with a form of dementia. And then we can tell you to get your affairs in order. And so that's where you don't want to get to. And so knowing that there's 20 to 30 years worth of buildup, it's looking at your lifestyle primarily, and then these other underlying conditions that just tend to stack upon one another until your brain gets to a point where it's just fighting too hard.
Right. And what are some of those underlying conditions?
So the underlying conditions can be everything from dysfunctional microbiome to diabetes. They can be toxins such as mold or heavy metals in your system, or even different types of phthalates or plastics, things that should not be in our body. And usually what happens is there's a breakdown in the blood-brain barrier, which is kind of our protective layer around the brain. These things should not be getting into our brain. Different infections, different, all these different things that are in your system, they shouldn't be getting in your brain in the first place, but they are. And then your brain kind of goes into this innate immune response, very much like an autoimmune reaction. where it's just constantly fighting against things that are attacking it. And that's when we start to see really the symptoms start to pile on. So it just builds up over time, just like those other autoimmune conditions.
Wow. Talk to me about the conventional medical approach, because as you said,
Sure.
you get this like, let's wait till it's bad enough to give you a full diagnosis. There's nothing we can do in the interim. And then you get a diagnosis and it's get your affairs in order. I mean, that sounds pretty bleak.
It is. Unfortunately, it's like this with most chronic diseases. As you know, our system in the United States is just not built for chronic disease. It's built for acute care. Medical doctors go to school for acute care. They have very few classes on nutrition or on exercise or on sleep. I think they take something like 5 hours of sleep, and sleep is the only time our brain actually repairs itself and detoxifies itself. Unbelievably important. But, lifestyle aside, doctors go to school for acute care. And we have the most amazing medical system if you are in an acute care situation. If you get hit by a truck and broken arm and you need to go to the hospital, you need to go to the emergency room. We have the best emergency room care in the world in the United States. But unfortunately, this number is really scary, but 86% of the dollars that go through insurance companies are for chronic disease management.
Wow.
And chronic disease management in our system usually means treating these symptoms. So we have to wait until a disease gets to a point where it's expressing symptoms, and then we treat those symptoms with a form of therapy or a medication to mask the symptoms, but we never actually get to that underlying root cause. And with Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, or other forms of cognitive decline involving toxins or head injuries, there are many, many other mechanisms of action that are going on that are triggering these issues. And you can't just treat it with a medication. In fact, there's 2 medications on the market for Alzheimer's disease. Both of them can slow the progression between 5 and 15% if caught early enough. And that's it. That's what we got. That's after spending $65 billion over the past 20 years in drug research. But it turns out that, most of that drug research was going after the most downstream event in the disease process. And that's this plaque, this buildup of plaques and tangles that it turns out, and a lot of research is going on right now to really dive into this, but that's the brain's immune response to being attacked. So the brain lays down this plaque and these tangles in response to being attacked by something else. So as you do in your practice, as many people in the integrative functional complementary world do, we look upstream. And with Alzheimer's, we look upstream. And in many cases, 10, 15, 20 years upstream, where we're looking at all the different underlying conditions that could lead somebody's brain down that pathway. We want to lower their risk as much as possible. There's certain genetic factors that can bring various risks of developing Alzheimer's disease, and that's what most people know. That's what's been published in the news, and people understand that. What they don't understand is that that risk factor, depending on the publication they're looking at, can have anywhere from a 10% increase in their risk all the way up to a 60% increase in their risk. Just depends on the different cohorts and different publications we look at. So even that's a little confusing. But the reason why that's confusing is because genetics aren't the only factor. So these are real people in real life, and they have all sorts of other things going on that are increasing their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And a whole lot of that comes down to lifestyle. It's the habits we have every single day. It's the environment we live in. It is the way that we eat and the way that we breathe and the way that we socialize, the purpose that we have in life. And all of those different things have a huge impact. And there's a reason why we see these changes happen somewhere around retirement age, people really start to shift and change their lives and their lifestyle around. And so it's something that we like to dig a lot deeper with.
So tell me a little bit, because you've been doing a lot of this, you've been doing this work now for several years, and now
Yes.
you have your own company called Mios,
Yes.
which is focusing very specifically on this. But talk a little bit more specifically about, and I'd actually love you to talk about some of the research that you were involved in, because
Sure.
we really do have this understanding. The conventional medical model is that Alzheimer's cannot be turned around. Right?
Right.
Like it's like you're on this sort of, it can be slowed, as you said, 5 to 15%,
Sure.
based on certain medications, but it's not something that you can't turn the ship around. But you turned the ship around. So talk to us a little bit about what you did differently.
Yes. Thank you. So I was at a functional medicine and brain restoration clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina for a number of years, and was actually working with my father-in-law. So I'm not a medical doctor. I am a neurofeedback practitioner, and then I was also the chief of operations of the office. And what we learned over time, and we started with head injuries and ADD and depression and kind of these, what I consider a little bit lower tier of the cognitive issues. We were working with nutritional therapies and supplements and exercise and general lifestyle, and then also a lot of neurostimulation technologies, which was having a really big impact on the electrical system of individuals' brains and kind of getting them back to where they needed to be. And as we progressed, we started working with some more complex cases, and we got into working with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease. And that's when we really found our flow, because we'd created this really big team, and my father-in-law really encouraged us to build up this great team and create a multidisciplinary clinic. And we were one of a handful of them in the United States that had the capacity to make a wrap around a single individual. So once you get to that mild cognitive impairment stage, and that's part of that pre-Alzheimer's, but the very kind of the very end, right before Alzheimer's, you have some trouble with memory, you have some trouble following directions, you have some trouble with thinking and behavior. I mean, you're right on that cusp. And so if it's a single practitioner saying come back and see me once a month, it's just not enough to get that person to make the changes in the right time and look at all of the underlying conditions to get them where they need to be. And then also, I mean, we had 3 medical doctors, we had a therapist, we had health coaches, we had all these different people who could look at different pieces of the labs and look at different pieces of the lifestyle and look at all these different things. But most practitioners don't have that. And so most people don't have the ability of going to a really large practice like that. And if they do, there's usually a waiting line, a huge waiting line going out the door. Now, what I realized in the work we were doing, and we ended up working with well over 50 people with subjective and mild cognitive impairment in 2018. Incredible work. About 90% of them improved in their brain function. They improved in their quality of life. And we ended up submitting those case studies to Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote The End of Alzheimer's and has produced an incredible amount of research. He was at the Buck Institute for years at UCLA, now has a company that's actually teaching other practitioners all of his protocols in reversing cognitive decline. It's very rooted in functional medicine. And we turned in a lot of our data, and he called us up and said, wow, this is amazing. How do you have all this? And we said, well, first of all, we have a different business model. So we don't have a fee for service model. We have a program model. And that program model allows us to collect data in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And it allows us to give everything that our clients need in order to get better. And so we don't have to haggle over supplements, and we don't have to have conversations about coming back in and seeing us or having a health coach. It's all included. He said, that's amazing. And I said, well, doesn't everybody do it like this? He said, no, no one does it like this. And a light bulb went off in my head. And that clinic actually transferred ownership at the end of 2018 and gave me the opportunity to create a venture of my own. And I wanted to look at things very different because there are so many amazing practitioners in this space who are doing wonderful work, but they don't have the resources, they don't have the team, they don't have the educational materials to deliver to clients at this level. And then there's some great research centers that are doing amazing research, but their research is really expensive and clinical trials are slow and it takes forever. I mean, the Weill Cornell University, Dr. Richard Isaacson, and I'm sure we'll get to the research in a little bit, but he just produced the most amazing paper on improving brain function and quality of life with people with mild cognitive impairment and others in pre-Alzheimer's disease. And they've been going at it for 8 years. And I mean, it's just, and they're about to, they're trying to get more money to go for another clinical trial to improve upon it. And so I said, well, why can't we just be using our field, using our network, using the collective intelligence of what we all have? And what is the one thing that's missing? Because if we got the same results that these other unbelievably expert practitioners got, then there must be something in the implementation. And there has to be this other side. Just like lifestyle has such a big impact as precision medicine does, maybe the business model and the community and the way that you actually bring a customer experience, maybe that has a whole lot of impact as well on the actual health result of the clients. And so that's what we started out to create in 2019. And it's launched and we have clients coming in, and I don't have data on them of if they're dramatically healthier than anybody else or not, but we've built a model to hopefully a couple years from now not only collect a massive amount of data that is going to support this functional integrative complementary root cause approach. It's going to support the lifestyle changes, but it's going to be a shift in the way we think about our care for clients. And that dramatic shift that I'm trying to make is by putting the client's results as the only thing that matters. And that's what we do. So we do a very large comprehensive assessment, and then we agree on what those results are going to be realistically. And then we dump all of our resources into getting that person to those results. So it's not about codes. It's not about certain supplements. It's not about one change here and another change there. It's the whole picture to drive that person to the unique results they want for their unique body and mind.
I love it. I love it for so many reasons. I love it for, number one, the fact that basically you're doing what everyone says you can't do, right? You're turning this around, and that is powerful. And you've got documented evidence of this in many cases. I was at a brain seminar recently, and it was interesting where the discussion was around the lack of research in this. And it was quoted, there was like 2 or 3 different papers that were quoted, but this paper that you were referenced in was one of them. And it was like, look, it's just the beginning of evidence that we can do this, but we can do this. And it's just so exciting. So number one, I think that's brilliant. I think number 2, I mean, we know that conventional medical model is brilliant, as you said, in acute care situations. And in these kinds of much more complex, comprehensive situations where it's not just about one medication. It's not, the medications aren't working. You didn't share the statistic, but you've shared it with me before. It's something like 96% of the medications completely fail.
99.6.
99.6 failure rate.
$65 billion.
That just makes you want to cry, right? So it's not something that the medical world has a viable solution for, but also the system is not set up to provide the kind of, as you talk, I love this kind of circle of care idea, right? Because we go to the doctor and it's just system is set up so that they have 10 minutes, right? You see them twice a year at most. And it's just not we are so much more complex than that. So the fact that you're bringing in all of these different aspects, and the kinds of changes that you're asking of people are very possible, but also hard, right? Like actually changing our habits is the most challenging thing that we can do. Even something as seemingly simple as getting a little bit more sleep every night, that can be a huge hurdle for people, right? And that's just the beginning, as you're talking about. It's totally possible, but if we just sort of send people out the door with this long list of, here's your checklist of 30 things that I want you to go implement, like, I mean, that might last 2 days, right?
Where do
Like,
you turn for the education? You go to
oh,
Dr. Google, right? And then you pull up, brain health diet, and you get a South Beach and a North Beach and the keto. And I mean, you get so many different options. And how do you know if any of those are going to be right for you? So you try 3 or 4 different ones, nothing fits. And so you give up, and now you're 7 months down the road. And once you're seeing symptoms with pre-Alzheimer's disease,
clock's
there
ticking.
is no luxury of time of let's just figure out if the Mediterranean or the keto or the flex or whatever diet is working for me. We need to figure out what's going to be the best based on your microbiome, your nutrients, and get you the precision medical care that you need to get you back on the right track. And then there's this huge part, as you mentioned, of behavior design.
Right.
I mean, even as forward thinking as we are in functional and integrative medicine, this idea of working really, really hard with people on behavior design, not just lifestyle design, but how they make their choices and why, and celebrating that, and actually, making little tangible things that they can bite off each day and build that up. I mean, that to me is a huge piece that we're missing. That in community, right? We've siloed everything, and there's all this privacy, and of course, privacy is extremely important, but community and getting out there and dealing with other people who are feeling the same way that you're feeling. I mean, that is a big part of our program, to initiate that, so that not only the individual with the symptoms and the condition can understand that they're not alone, but their spouse or their kids have people to talk to, and understand that there's a power in that community. But community and behavior design, I think those are two of the next frontiers that are going to fall into this precision medicine area that we're in, that are going to make huge changes. And that's something that conventional medicine can do. They just need to fit it in, but it could be dramatic.
One other thing that I think is really powerful, Fear, is that, this idea of having this whole circle of care that has been curated for them,
Yes.
right? Like, I can't tell you how many clients I have who come to me for one aspect, but then they're dealing with their GP with this, and they're dealing with this practitioner for this, and this practitioner for this. And so they're the one person in the center of all this, but they don't have a medical degree or a health degree to be able to understand how all of these different pieces fit together. And inevitably we have, different approaches or different thoughts. And to have a whole team that is communicating with each other, that has been curated, but that those different needs can be met, and not put the burden of responsibility on the person who is being served to try to piece all of this together. I think that is, that's just magnificent. I think about that. Oh my gosh, if I had a care team where I had, like, everybody knew what was going on with me and could look at all of my labs and say, okay, this is where you're headed, and we're going to do these things to, like, make sure that does not happen. I mean, I'm in, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is, I dream of that. So the fact that you're creating that is just, and especially for something like this, that is so, I heard a statistic, and I'm going to probably botch it and you can correct me, but it was something like, within the next 10 or 20 years, it's like 1 of every 2 people is going to have, over the age of 60, 65, is going to have Alzheimer's, which means that you've got it or you're caring for someone with it. Is that correct, or am I making that up?
Right now, 1 in 3 seniors are dying with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia.
Wow.
And by 2050, they expect 1 in 3 individuals over the age of 65 to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, which is just insane. And I mean,
Yeah.
if that doesn't break our healthcare system, I don't know what will. I mean, we're talking $1.1 trillion they're estimating spending on on just Alzheimer's.
Right.
That's not, I mean, so that'll be 15 million people. So we're now going to be looking at 120 million plus with pre-Alzheimer's disease who need some level of care. So it's crazy.
Mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, obviously that not everybody can have an entire curated team wrapped around them. Another thing that we've done that's fairly unique is we designed and built technology to enable that, because it didn't exist. I mean, there was no reason for anybody to build technology that could allow a health coach and a medical doctor and an exercise physiologist and a therapist and a nutritionist to communicate with each other, because they didn't understand that people would actually want that or pay for that. Right. And the model for fee for service just doesn't fit it. No. So we had to build and design that technology. And we actually built what we call a co-pilot seat for an individual's primary care physician or their psychiatrist. Because the last thing those people want to do is get on the phone for an hour with another doctor and talk about this case or that case. But we can't afford for that person not to be supportive of the results that we're trying to get to. So we add them on as a view only in a co-pilot seat, and they get to see the progression of these individuals as they go through their program, and they can learn alongside of the client. So I think it's really a way to share the information rather than saying, oh, this is what we do, this is our proprietary formula, it's our protocols, and we're going to silo that. For us, it's how quickly can we get this data back out into the field, and how much more can we bring in that we can learn from, so that we can lower the price of this, and so that we can offer this service to more people and get people the care that they need.
100%.
Yeah.
So I have a few last questions here to kind of bring us home. So my first two kind of go together. Who qualifies to work with you, and how do they find out more about working with you specifically?
So anyone with pre-Alzheimer's disease who is willing to invest in their own health and is willing to make necessary changes, and participate at least an 80% level of the daily activities and weekly activities that they're given to make changes in 6 months. So pre-Alzheimer's disease, that would be anything up to and including mild cognitive impairment. So that would be the only diagnosable disease that we work with. But if you've just been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in the last 6 months to a year and told that you keep coming back every 6 months to get monitored, that's an individual that we really enjoy working with, because we can make dramatic changes for them. Whereas somebody who's just looking for prevention, we can make dramatic shifts in underlying conditions that they may not feel any different from, but they're going to be on a different trajectory for life. So, unfortunately, as human beings, we still will jump faster at the sight of pain and saving ourselves from more pain. And we're not great at prevention. If we are, we're like working in this field. So
we're not good at prevention.
But individuals who, and right now we're open in the state of California, but 95% of our program is virtual. So you can establish care in California and visit once, and you can work from the comfort of your own home for the rest of the entire program.
Brilliant.
We didn't want to build, brick and mortar facilities and make people sit in waiting rooms and read magazines. That just seemed kind of like the old way of doing things.
Right.
So yeah, and to get in touch with us, you can go to our website, mioshealth.com, and click the Apply Now button, and that'll bring you to a little questionnaire. You can kind of see where you stand, and then also you can book a call at this point directly with me. Right. I want to talk with every single person who's calling in and really understand what people are interested in.
Excellent. So we'll put the link to that. We'll make sure that that's here included right underneath this video. And my other question for you is, what would you say are the three most important? And I know I hate it when people ask me this question, so I'm sorry to do it to you, but I know people like to do things in threes. We want to make it super manageable. So here I am, I am, my grandfather died of Alzheimer's disease. I know that there's this predisposition in my family. What are the three most important things I can be doing right now to, as much as possible, prevent myself from going that path?
Okay. So I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah.
This is not medical advice. I don't play one on TV.
No.
We, we have teamed up with incredibly amazing medical doctors. And so the first thing is really understand. So understand where you are and get a baseline for your brain function. If you want to take it further, get a baseline for your brain health. But brain function is a 30-minute online test that you can do. We give this to every single person after the first phone call if they seem like they're a good fit. We have them do a cognitive function test. It looks at their memory, their attention, their flexibility, their processing speed, their decision making, all these things. We think of memory as being that one symptom, right? Oh, I'm losing my memory. Way downstream. We're talking decision making and processing speed, like just the speed of your brain. All those things are precursors that we want to know. We want to have a baseline, and if you're feeling great, now is the time to do it, because then you know where your brain function stands, and you can test it again in a year, and you can test it again in 5 years, and you always have something to look back at. So this is like a simple blood test for your brain function. If you want to take it further with your brain health, I would look at your blood-brain barrier. Because what we are seeing, what the research is now showing us, is that people with a very healthy blood-brain barrier don't tend to go down the same path as people with an unhealthy blood-brain barrier, just like leaky gut. Right? If your gut wall is totally jammed up and you're good to go, and things aren't getting out that shouldn't get out, and things aren't getting in that shouldn't get in, then there's a good chance that you're not feeling like crap down there. Same thing with your brain. So that's the understand portion. As far as the lifestyle goes, I have to say that sleep is the number one most important. Nutrition is a super close number two, but sleep is where your brain repairs itself during the night. And if it's not repairing itself, then it's not flushing out the toxins. It's not flushing out the excess plaques and tangles. It is not making those new connections. If you're not sleeping well, you can't digest things properly. You are not going to have great exercise the next day. You're not going to recover from the exercise from that day. So I think sleep is the most underrated and biggest lever that we can pull in our health, period. And it's difficult for people to get those appropriate sleep habits. And we've been wearing sleepless nights as a badge of honor on our shoulder for so long, especially in the professional fields, especially with medical doctors, with residency.
I know
That's
the
where the problem
irony.
kind of had started in medicine, but it can't be overrated. And so I think sleep is easily number two, and the best thing that you can do at home to change. And there's lots of take home things to help you fix your sleep now with apps and wearables. And I mean, I wear things to track my sleep. And number three is learn new things. So keeping your brain challenged and keeping your brain working is amazing. I mean, it's so rare that we see people who have very challenging professions go down this road before they've ended that profession. I mean, sometimes it happens. Sometimes there's early onset Alzheimer's, which is a totally different, separate side of genetics and other predispositions. But it's usually once people retire and they stop using their brain, they stop challenging it, and they say, well, I'm doing a crossword puzzle every morning. And that doesn't really count. So it's really challenging your brain and learning new things is going to keep your brain function where you want it to be. And that's what we really care about. It's our brain function.
Those are great tips.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Seth, anything? Let me just look through my notes, which I haven't even been checking. I've just been chatting. Da, 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 da.
And you're doing this with all of your clients, and everybody that works with you is already getting a boost. They are already lowering their risk of developing Alzheimer's down the road because their microbiome is healthy, because they're lowering their triggers of their autoimmune processes, because they are generally living a better, healthier lifestyle. So whether they think they're coming for you just for an autoimmune condition, or to get pregnant, or to balance out their microbiome, all of those things are leading them towards a lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and a generally healthier life and better quality of life as they age. So they're getting an added bonus when they come in and visit you for those pieces.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, we talk about you mentioned the leaky gut, or the leaky brain, leaky gut, and there's quite a connection there. It's pretty profound. It's within hours of having a concussion,
Yes.
the gut lining is compromised.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it goes both ways. Right. And so, it's, these things, our bodies are just, the more I learn, the more fascinating. And our bodies just have these magnificent protective mechanisms, and they're so interrelated. And I think it's actually really encouraging, when you're talking about these underlying conditions. What was encouraging to me when you're sharing these is like, these are the things that sort of, regardless of what the end goal is, like, okay, there's a history of diabetes in my family, there's a history of cardiovascular disease, or there's a history of cancer, or there's a history of autoimmune disease, or there's a history of Alzheimer's. The things that we need to deal with ultimately come back to the same core basics, right? Like, we need to be getting rest. We need to be getting sleep. We need to heal the gut. We need to make sure that we are minimizing our exposure to all these different kinds of environmental toxins. We need to make sure our body's detoxification abilities are really going strong. And the particular, the sort of constellation of what that looks like for each person is going to be very different, because we're bio individuals, right?
Yeah.
But the themes are the same. And so it's encouraging, because it's what's frustrating, Dr. Google can make you feel like you got to go in this direction for this thing, you got to go in this direction for this thing, and it can just like be this complete exercise in crazy making. But, when you take that 30,000 foot view and look, it's like, there's some really important themes that are present here. And I'm personally so excited that you guys are doing this work, because it is so critical. And I hope anyone watching this who either, if you yourself are struggling with any kind of cognitive issues, or if you have somebody in your family or your circle of friends that is starting to display signs, it's not too late. Go to Mios, apply, chat with Seth. I can tell you this about Seth. He's never going to sell you on something that he doesn't believe 150% you can benefit from. If he doesn't think their program is the right one for you, he's not going to let you in. It's not even about, is he going to try to get you in? He's not going to let you in. So you're going to get the goods. Pardon me?
We can't afford to take people who aren't the right fit.
Right.
We won't do it. So.
Well, thank you, Seth. This has been so fun.
Thank you. So much fun.
Wonderful. So we're going to include the link to how to get in touch with Seth. And thank you so much, Seth. This is fantastic. And everyone, any comments or anything, please put them under the video here, and we'll get right back to you.